Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we are back today for episode 7 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk a bit about free agency, kind of recap all of the big signings, and go over some winners and losers of the week, both players that signed this past week or players that were affected by those various signings or lack thereof. If you missed any of our previous shows, you can find them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, pretty much anywhere that you would typically listen to a podcast. It should be there. Go ahead and follow the show on Twitter at Dynasty War Room and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Dynasty War Room as well. Both of those help us out a ton, so I appreciate you if you're able to go and do that. And we're just going to jump right into things here because we have a lot of players to talk about. We're just going to go winners and losers position by position. So we'll start with quarterbacks, and we'll start with kind of the obvious winner amongst free agency, and that's Kirk Cousins. Going from the Vikings to the Atlanta Falcons, signed a 4-year contract to head to Atlanta. The first 2 years fully guaranteed, so that's awesome for him, and it's great for fantasy. So as long as he comes back from his Achilles injury, this is a great landing spot with great weapons, both at every level, really. Drake London at receiver and Kyle Pitts at tight end, Bijan Robinson at running back. It should be a very, very strong offense. They play in a dome, which is also nice for as the year goes on. And Cousins is a perfect quarterback for this type of system where you have coaches from the Rams offense coming over. This is not going to be handing the ball off 100 times a game like it was with Arthur Smith, or, mixing in your second and third string players more than they need to be like it was with Arthur Smith. So we don't have to deal with that anymore. So that's great news for Kirk Cousins. I think he's generally a buy right now in fantasy football. Now, the price point is probably going to start creeping into late first. But I think if you can get him for an early second round pick, I think that would be a great move right now. Hopefully you bought before free agency because now it might be a little bit tougher. But he's a great QB2 in Superflex leagues, and he's somebody that I think is going to make an impact all across the board here this coming season in fantasy football. Now, the next winner at quarterback is going to be Russell Wilson. So he signed a 1-year, essentially vet minimum deal with the Steelers because the Broncos are paying nearly all of his $39 million in salary for this current season. So that's great signing for the Steelers, a steal financially, and the team is very committed to Russell Wilson being the starter. So they traded Kenny Pickett after reports surfaced that Pickett did not handle the signing of Wilson very well. They turned around, they traded for Justin Fields, and reports quickly after that trade went down came out saying, hey, Russell Wilson's going to be our starter. Fields will compete, but this is, Russell Wilson's job to lose. So I think that's a great sign for Russell Wilson. Again, solid QB2, QB3 in Superflex. Not worth as much as Cousins, obviously, but still somebody that should be in an improved situation. I would expect that Pittsburgh will draft a receiver at some point in the early rounds in this draft after trading away Deontay Johnson to Carolina, which we're not going to talk about a ton on today's episode, but I do think that is great news for Bryce Young. I think it's pretty much status quo for Deontay Johnson, but Russell Wilson in a good spot. I fully expect that if anyone's going to be able to, squeeze the most out of Wilson here in the later stages of his career, it would be Mike Tomlin. So good spot there. And somebody that I am excited to see if he can bounce back and return a little bit to form this coming season. Next up, we have Baker Mayfield. I think he's another guy that really secured a really nice contract for himself. And it's team-friendly, too, if you think about it. It's not too overwhelming. 3 years, $100 million. In terms of, an average per year, it's, he got less than Daniel Jones. And he's somebody that they're basically running it back in Tampa. They brought back most of their key pieces, including Mike Evans, which is a big win for Baker Mayfield. So I expect that combination to be strong again this season. He's someone that I view as a hold, essentially. I don't know that he's somebody that you could attempt to sell him if you're rebuilding, but I don't know that you're going to secure quite as high of a return as you would like. If you want to buy him, I have no issue with that, but I think in general he's a hold. Just one of those guys that if you were lucky enough to pick him off of waivers or acquire him cheap over the last couple of years when he was bouncing around, I think you just kind of enjoy what you have with Baker Mayfield and know that you hit on somebody that we talk about the whole buy low all the time, and a lot of those times things don't work out. But this would be a situation where if you did buy low on Baker Mayfield, I think it's very fair to say that he is a hit at this point and you made a good move. So I like Mayfield. I think he's in a great spot, and that's why he is a winner coming out of free agency. Next up, we'll go with Will Levis. So this is somebody that obviously was not a free agent, of course, but the young quarterback, I think, is going to be in a much better position to succeed this fall because the Tennessee Titans added some pretty quality weapons around him, both at running back and wide receiver. So Calvin Ridley signed a huge deal. If this were based today on just whether it's good or bad for a player, can't argue that Calvin Ridley secured the bag and got himself a nice contract. So that's great for Will Levis because it gives him another quality wide receiver to go with DeAndre Hopkins on the outside. So that's great news. And then Tony Pollard as well gives him a little bit more of a passing threat out of the backfield to go with Tajay Spears. Of course, Derrick Henry was good last year, had a pretty mediocre offensive line, but I would expect the Titans to add offensive line in the draft. And I think this offense might start to be a little bit more pass-focused with the new coaching staff and the fact that, they have a pretty solid depth chart now at wide receiver and 2 pass-catching running backs. So somebody to keep an eye on. I don't know if I'm really a strong believer in Levis himself as a talent, but he is being put in position to where if he is going to be successful, we should see it this season. Next up, we have Gardner Minshew, just kind of a cheap one-year potential starter for the Vegas Raiders. This is somebody that, if you're a contender and you're looking for a third or fourth QB, you can probably get Gardner Minshew for a, third, maybe even a fourth round pick. I mean, this is somebody that may or may not even be the starter this upcoming season, but if he is, it's going to be on a bad team, but having quarterback depth is always nice. They gave him a decent financial commitment. They did not trade for Justin Fields. So this is a team that I would expect is one that could be in the race for Michael Penix or Bo Nix in the draft, whether that's with their first round pick or their second round pick or a trade. I think would probably be the best scenario right around that 1-2 turn. But Gardner Minshew, somebody that you could add to your roster as a fourth quarterback option, something like that. No issues there. Now we're going to touch on the losers of free agency at the quarterback position, and there's no bigger loser pretty much at any position than Justin Fields, which is unfortunate. I am a Justin Fields manager, and his dynasty value, unfortunately, has pretty much dropped off a cliff. He was viewed as, a top 15 quarterback in dynasty. I believe earlier this offseason, we even said that he might be a buy candidate, thinking that he would be traded and be the starter somewhere. That is obviously not going to be the case. He's going to back up Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh, which is very unfortunate, especially given his rushing upside in fantasy. That's what makes him so valuable, is the fact that he's such a good running quarterback. But NFL teams just not big fans of Justin Fields. So this is a situation where I don't think you necessarily want to sell Justin Fields because his value is so low right now. I don't think you're going to get anything close to what he would be worth if he ever comes back into fantasy relevance. So because of his contract situation, I think you're going to know a lot after the NFL draft and after the month of May when the Steelers have to make a decision on his fifth-year option. I believe he's only getting around $3 million for this year, which is good backup money, but next year his salary would be $22 million if they pick up that fifth-year option. I'm not sure that Pittsburgh will do that unless they feel that he will take over for Russell Wilson in 2025. So keep an eye on that because regardless, if he gets let go as a free agent, we're talking 2025, the offseason, as a chance for him to sign somewhere else as a bridge starter, have another chance to kind of prove himself. And that would be the time that you'd probably look to sell him, when it starts coming into focus that, hey, this guy might start again. Or you can just wait. Russell Wilson, could always, there's always injury concerns, a risk of something happening there, and that would increase his value as well. So I wouldn't necessarily trade him right now when his value is so low. But unfortunately, I don't know that he will ever be this, top 15, top 12 dynasty quarterback that I think a lot of people hoped he would be. Now, another guy next up on the losers list is Justin Herbert, who, through no fault of his own, has nobody left to throw the ball to. So all four of his, top pass catchers, or at least four out of his top five, are gone. I mean, Keenan Allen, his favorite target, traded to Chicago. Mike Williams, he was cut due to salary cap reasons. Austin Eckler headed over to the Commanders in free agency. Gerald Everett is gone to the Bears. And the Chargers made no significant additions on offense. There are a couple depth signings at tight end and Gus Edwards at running back, but nothing, that really moves the needle. So that's, obviously bad news for Justin Herbert. I think this potentially opens a buy low window on Justin Herbert if you're a believer in his talent like I am. But, Harbaugh coming in, probably not going to be throwing the ball around as much as the previous couple of seasons, but they need somebody else to throw to. Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer is not going to get it done as a wide receiver room. So I would fully expect at some point in the draft that they add both a running back and a wide receiver, but don't be shocked if they take offensive line or trade back or do something else in the first round besides receiver. They are in prime position to land a Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze should they choose to, but I'm not sure that that's really the way that they're going to go based on how Jim Harbaugh likes to run his offenses. So something to just keep an eye on, but Justin Herbert, unfortunately, is a loser of free agency so far. Next up on our losers list at quarterback, we don't actually have a name yet for whoever this will be, but it's going to be the quarterback that the Patriots draft in the first round. Assuming that New England keeps the third overall pick and takes a quarterback, whether it's Jaden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, they did not do anything to help out their new quarterback in free agency. No big additions at receiver. Kendrick Bourne re-signed. That's pretty much the big move they have. They got Pop Douglas coming back. So it's not a great wide receiver room there, and that's unfortunate for whoever's going to take over the quarterback position there. They did sign Jacoby Brissett, so there is a possibility that maybe they trade out, build up some depth at other positions, and then address QB next year. But I also thought this could be a solid landing spot for Justin Fields, but evidently Patriots want to go a different route. So I think right now things are trending towards Jaden Daniels going 2 to Washington and Drake May going 3 to New England. But whoever it is that lands here, it's not going to be a great position for a rookie to come into. So that's why Patriots quarterback, just their entire room, whoever they pick, is on the loser list coming out of free agency. So now we're going to move on over to running backs, which was, running back was really the big position of free agency. We had a ton of moves all across the position at different levels, including the first big move right out of the gate on the first day of the legal tampering period with DeAndre Swift going to Chicago. But the biggest winner at the running back position in my mind is Saquon Barkley, who is the number one running back position that was a free agent this year, and he ended up in a really great situation going to Philadelphia. High-level offense. He should finish as a top 10 running back. I believe he was RB13 this past season, and he didn't even break 1,000 yards. He didn't have a bunch of touchdowns. just an awful situation there in New York with just a bad offense overall, bad offensive line. So we saw what DeAndre Swift did in New England or in Philadelphia last year, and Saquon Barkley is a significantly more talented running back than DeAndre Swift. And I know there's been some talk about, maybe his pass catching work drops, or touchdowns aren't going to be there because of the tush push and Jalen Hurts and all these things. But if you look at the stats from last year, DeAndre Swift caught 39 passes, and Saquon Barkley with the Giants had 41. So it's not all that different. I think this is something too where, I would expect it to be at least about the same. I don't know if you're going to see a huge increase, but I don't think you're going to see a big drop off there. And in terms of touchdowns, Saquon Barkley had 6 touchdowns on the ground, 4 receiving last year. DeAndre Swift did only have 5 on the ground and 1 receiving. But if you watched any Eagles games last year, you know that DeAndre Swift is about the king of going down at the 1-yard line. I mean, it seemed like every single game he just gets tripped up or falls over out of nowhere or doesn't have, the strength to push his way into the end zone. It was, if you were a DeAndre Swift manager, I'm sure you saw these, these games and just were so frustrated watching that. Saquon Barkley to me is not somebody who's just going to trip and fall over at the 1-yard line every game. This is someone that's going to get in the end zone. Now, is he going to end up with, 15 touchdowns? Probably not. But could he end up with 7 or 8? Certainly. I don't see this as some situation where he's going to only score, 3 times on the year and finish, as RB25. This is not, a situation like that. He's going to run for more yards per carry. I expect him to end up well over 1,000 yards. DeAndre Swift had over 1,000 last year on fewer carries than Saquon Barkley had. So this is a great fit. I think there are some doubters with the whole tush-push thing. So if this is something where you can maybe take advantage of that and acquire Saquon Barkley in a trade, I think I have him higher than consensus. But if you have a late first and you're in a position where, especially in the 9 through 12 range, where maybe you're not acquiring one of those high-level quarterbacks or, top 3 receivers, and you need a running back, go trade the 111 for Saquon or something like that. I think that would be a good move, especially if whatever team has Saquon is either not a believer or is entering a rebuilding phase. Next up is Josh Jacobs, who got a huge deal with the Green Bay Packers, 4 years, $48 million. And it kind of, I think, surprised a lot of people, myself included, because Aaron Jones was there, but he's there no more. Aaron Jones off to the Vikings after being cut because of this signing. And Josh Jacobs is somebody that I think sort of encompasses a bit of both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, and can do some of the things that both guys did before, but this time without the committee. So A.J. Dillon is still there as a backup. He signed a really cheap deal, but this is not going to be some 50-50 split like we saw for a lot of the time at the end of the year between Jones and Dillon. This is going to be Josh Jacobs 80-90% of the time. I mean, it's going to be entirely Josh Jacobs, assuming he stays healthy, and I think that's great for his fantasy value. So if you bought him after kind of a down year last season, this is great news for you, and I think he's going to be a strong running back, should easily be top 10 this upcoming season. So great situation for him, and Josh Jacobs is a winner of free agency. Next up is Derrick Henry, who is somebody that I have been telling you to sell over the offseason, and generally I think that is still a pretty good piece of advice. However, he did land in probably about the best possible situation that he could have with the Baltimore Ravens, and I would fully expect that he's going to end up with a bunch of touchdowns. He's maybe not going to catch a lot of passes or run for a boatload of yards, but this is somebody that still I think is going to have another good year, maybe better than I anticipated. But again, this is something where if you are a rebuilding team, now is the time to sell Derrick Henry. His value is at a high point for where it will be over the next 6 to 12 months. And if you do not think you have a championship level team, he is somebody that you should move, because Derrick Henry at most probably has a year, maybe two if you're lucky, years of relevance left. So again, great situation in redraft. I think he could be a great pick, but in Dynasty, his value is peaking again relative to where it was over the past year or so. So take advantage of that if you are a middle of the pack or rebuilding team, and if you're a contender and you have him on your roster, Derrick Henry is the type of player, kind of like Christian McCaffrey and some of the others around, where sometimes it's okay to just let a guy die on your roster. You don't need to sell every single player before he ages out to acquire something in return. If they're a player of Derrick Henry's caliber and you're a contender and you know you're going to make the playoffs, just ride it out and see what you can get from him this upcoming season. Next up, we got a couple, sort of second and third tier running backs that I think landed in some really good spots that are winners of free agency. So we'll start with Zach Moss, who was somebody that I told you about on last week's episode to look out for, and was a potential buy low candidate before he signed somewhere else. And that's exactly what happened. He ended up in a good landing spot with the Bengals, who traded Joe Mixon to Houston. Now he's probably going to be stuck in a committee with Chase Brown and potentially somebody that they draft. But if you are, a team that is rebuilding or middle of the pack or something along those lines, his value, again, like Henry, is peaking into somebody that you can probably get something solid for in a trade. So don't be afraid to send some offers out and see what somebody might be able to give you for him, especially if they, are a Bengals fan or really believe in the offense. There's going to be a lot of hype around Chase Brown. But to me, Zach Moss is probably the leader in the clubhouse to be the number one guy in that committee, but somebody that, got a 2-year contract and had a nice season with Indianapolis. So he is certainly a winner of free agency. You can say the same thing about Gus Edwards, who signed with the LA Chargers, got a 2-year contract going from one Harbaugh brother to the other. And this is a situation where everything we have seen from the Chargers is that they want to run the ball. They went out and they signed a blocking tight end for big money. They traded or cut their top 2 receivers. No big offensive additions. Gus Edwards is probably not going to be your starting running back for the Chargers come week 1, but he's probably going to be the number 2. He might get some goal line work, and it's a good situation. So he's been an effective player. We saw last year he had a nose for the end zone, and I like the landing spot. I think we're going to see a lot of goal line opportunities for him as well, depending on who they draft because I'm sure they will draft somebody. So it's just a matter of, is it a second round pick, third round pick? Do they get somebody late? Are they going the full rebuild mode? We shall see. But again, some renewed value if you are a rebuilding team stuck with Edwards on your roster. Now is the time to try to ship him out. Next up, we have Joe Mixon, who's kind of had a roller coaster of a week in terms of, is it good, is it bad? A lot of people were down on him entering free agency because of the cut rumors, which turned out to largely be true because there were reports that he was going to be cut. Instead, he ended up getting traded at the last second. I believe it was for a 7th-round pick to Houston, where he then got a new contract. So it went from, oh man, Joe Mixon might be, essentially done for fantasy football to all of a sudden he's got some good value again. He's going to be the starting running back for this year and next year. And, he got a 3-year contract. So, can't really complain if you're a Joe Mixon manager because this is probably a better scenario than you envisioned a few weeks ago. So Joe Mixon is a winner out of free agency. Next up, we have Devin Singletary, who is leaving Houston and this time heading to the New York Giants, where, I think a lot of people were wondering, okay, is Singletary somebody that, is just going to end up as, the clear backup running back somewhere in a committee or something like that? But he got a pretty solid 3-year contract with the Giants. They don't really have anybody else on the roster, so I would expect someone in the draft. But again, this could be a situation given the all of the needs that the Giants have, that, it's a 4th, 5th, 6th round pick, something like that goes with Singletary. And I think it's a pretty good spot. Saquon Barkley was a workhorse running back there. So there is the possibility that they view Singletary in that same way, that he's going to get a lot of touches. He might not be as effective, obviously, as somebody like Saquon, but could get a pretty heavy workload. So if you are in need of a cheaper running back to fill out some depth as a contender, he could be somebody to target. But again, I would probably wait until after the NFL draft. And if you're a rebuilding team, now is a great time to sell him, especially before the draft, just in case they do take a running back and his value dips. But he's somebody that, there should be some interest for. And then last but not least, at the running back position, the winners, I'm going to go with Zamir White, who is looking like the starter for the Raiders this season, unless they draft someone, of course. That's always a risk. But he could be in for a nice season. He's young enough that you don't necessarily have to sell him if you're a rebuilding team. He's only 24. Some of this will depend on your belief in the Raiders offense, but he did finish the year pretty strong. So he's somebody to keep an eye on moving forward. Now you'll note a couple guys that we didn't talk about that I don't really view as winners or losers, but they did sign some big contracts. Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift. We briefly mentioned them earlier. I think generally pretty good spots. The reason I don't have them listed as either a winner or a loser is because I think their value is relatively the same as it was before. They both got some, good but not great landing spots. They got some financial commitment. So those are both guys that I view as holds. Ride it out. Pretty good landing spot, not necessarily elite, but still players that I like, especially Pollard. I do think that Pollard probably has a pretty good role there in Tennessee. I think he will be the starter over Tajay Spears, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But just wanted to touch on those two players because I know if you're listening, you're probably going, well, those are two of the bigger running back signings and you didn't talk about them. So just wanted to mention that. Now we have the losers. And we'll start with Austin Eckler, who, has the big name, has been a really productive fantasy running back over the years, but he looked awful last season, and he's pretty much just the third down running back now. He's going to be in that pass-catching role for the Commanders behind Brian Robinson, and I think regardless of whether you're a contender, rebuilder, whatever, you should be looking to sell Austin Eckler, see if there's anybody that would take him based on his name value and the contract he just signed. But it was for relatively small money, and I just think he's probably seen his last days as being a high level fantasy asset. Next up is Tajay Spears, who, as we just mentioned, now has to compete with Tony Pollard. So I hope you sold him before free agency because he was being valued really highly in the Dynasty community, like borderline RB1 type of running back, which I wholly disagree with. And he's going to be the clear second option behind Tony Pollard. He's got, durability concerns given his knee issues. So his future upside is limited in my mind. I don't think Tajay Spears is going to be bad. I think he's a very talented running back. But I do see him as just kind of being this change of pace, solid number 2 guy, probably for his entire career. I don't see the situation where he ever is a workhorse running back. I don't think he can be a Derrick Henry, who dominated the Tennessee backfield for years and years. I think he's going to be part of a committee, and that's kind of where he fits. And he's going to have some explosive plays and, do some nice things, especially in real life. But he might be someone that is more of a high-quality real-life running back than he is a fantasy running back. Next up, we have A.J. Dillon on the loser list, and he's stuck in Green Bay, but it's not even a situation where he's stuck in Green Bay with Aaron Jones, who at least we know how that situation plays out. He's now stuck behind Josh Jacobs, who can handle the goal line work and pass-catching duties. It's a one-year deal. I don't see this as something particularly great for Dillon. I think his value probably continues to drop. If you are a rebuilding team, maybe look to see if you can sell Dillon to the Jacobs manager. I think that would be a solid move. But unfortunately for A.J. Dillon, I just don't really see a lot of fantasy relevance moving forward. Next up is Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. And the reason that he is on my list of free agency losers is because one of the things that really makes Stevenson stand out is his ability as a pass catcher. But the Patriots went out and signed Antonio Gibson, whose primary value to a team is as a pass catcher out of the backfield. So he's probably going to lose third down work, pass catching work to Gibson. He's had some durability concerns. So, that could end up being a little bit more of a committee than we maybe expect. So I don't love Ramondre Stevenson coming up in 2024. So that's why he's on the list as a loser. Next up, similar to Tajay Spears, we have Roschon Johnson / Khalil Herbert. So basically the rest of the Bears backfield, same type of situation. There's a lot of hype for Roschon Johnson. I actually thought, maybe he could take over as the starter this year, but the Bears evidently do not believe that and went out and signed DeAndre Swift to a big contract. So this is going to be DeAndre Swift's backfield. I think Roschon Johnson will probably be the number 2 and should get some goal line work. And maybe if he can work his way in a little bit more, turn this into a bit of a committee. But I think it's pretty much over for Khalil Herbert. And, I'm not really that excited about anybody else in the Bears backfield after the Swift signing. Dameon Pierce is, I believe, the last loser on this list here at the running back position. And now Dameon Pierce has, lost in general throughout the last, 6, 8, 10 months. I mean, he really went downhill once the season started, lost his job to Devin Singletary. But when Singletary signed with the Giants, there was maybe this moment of hope that Dameon Pierce could have a resurgence and take over some work in that backfield. But I think that is out the window now that Joe Mixon is there. And I would fully expect the Texans to add a running back at some point later in the draft. So, unfortunately, Dameon Pierce probably has seen the last of his fantasy-relevant days. Now we're going to move on over to the wide receiver position, where free agency was a bit less exciting compared to the running backs. Not a ton of big moves, but we'll start with my favorite free agent signing, probably out of everything, but especially at wide receiver, and that is Darnell Mooney to Atlanta. I think this is somebody that showed he can be a very good wide receiver in Chicago. Battled some injuries and struggled with Justin Fields as a passer, but this past season or so. But this is somebody that will fit in as the number 2 receiver in Atlanta. Kirk Cousins is going to love having him there. And going along with Darnell Mooney in terms of the winners is Drake London. So Drake London, Darnell Mooney, the 2 Atlanta receivers, they should be both primed for pretty big seasons. I think London is the obvious, kind of superstar breakout candidate for this season. He's already being priced that way in Dynasty, so you probably missed your window to buy. But he's somebody that I will be very excited about. And Mooney could be a very solid depth addition to your Dynasty roster, particularly as a flex. So really love that for everybody in Atlanta. And it's good for Kirk Cousins too, of course. Having some quality receivers besides just, your one guy, having multiple targets you can throw the ball to. He's going to have Mooney, London, and Kyle Pitts. So great situation all around for the Atlanta Falcons. Next up on the winner list is Josh Palmer. I think that Josh Palmer should be ranked ahead of Quentin Johnston. Someone's got to catch passes for the Chargers, and sure, they could draft somebody, but I won't be surprised if they pass on one at 5 and take one in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, something like that. And I think that Josh Palmer is a better player than Quentin Johnston. We saw absolutely nothing from Johnston last year. I do think this opens up a sell window for him. There's going to be someone out there willing to take a chance on him. So if you can get a 2nd round pick for Quentin Johnston, I would do that in a heartbeat. I think Josh Palmer is somebody that you can look to acquire. He certainly, I think, will be cheaper to acquire than Quentin Johnston, and I think he'll be more involved. So that's why Palmer, to me, is a winner at the wide receiver position. Next is Christian Kirk, who is also the number 1 target in his offense. And with Calvin Ridley signing with Tennessee, I think Kirk is much more likely to produce like he did in 2022 than he did in 2023. He's back from injury. The Jaguars signed Gabe Davis to play on the outside, but he's not somebody that I'm particularly worried about. I do expect Jacksonville to draft a receiver in the draft pretty early. You could even see one in the first round. Brian Thomas Jr. could be somebody that they target to play as an X receiver. But Christian Kirk, really highly productive player. He and Trevor Lawrence have a really good connection, and I think that Kirk is kind of chronically undervalued. So he's somebody that should see a boost in his value now with no Ridley. Hollywood Brown is also a winner. He didn't get the contract that he would have liked, or that I think a lot of managers would like, but he did end up in a great situation with Kansas City. He's probably going to be their number 2 next to Rashee Rice. But this is, if you're going to, rebuild your value as a receiver, there's, not many places that would be better to land. And this is, it's a 1-year prove-it deal for Hollywood Brown. So if you are a rebuilding team, you should absolutely be selling Hollywood Brown. Frankly, if you're even a middle-of-the-pack team, you should probably be selling Hollywood Brown. But if you're a contending team and you have him, no issues in holding him, just understand that there is some risk given his injury history, and his sort of lack of production recently. But I like the landing spot. I think it's a good position for him. Patrick Mahomes certainly will appreciate having him as a deep threat. So that's why Hollywood Brown ends up on the winners list. Next, we have a pair of receivers for the Houston Texans, Nico Collins and Tank Dell, both winners coming out of free agency. And this is largely because the Texans re-signed Noah Brown to a 1-year deal, and he'll be the third receiver for them. And I think that's great news because it kind of signals that the Texans probably are not planning to go out and make a huge splash at wide receiver. They were in the conversation with Keenan Allen, which would have been unfortunate, but that did not work out. So I think that Nico Collins and Tank Dell are probably going to run it back as the number 1 and number 2 options in Houston, which is great paired with CJ Stroud. And even better is they traded away the 23rd overall pick in the draft to Minnesota. So they have a couple second-round picks now. So they might add a receiver there. Would not necessarily be surprising, given that Collins and his contract situation coming up soon. But, I'm much less worried about a second-round receiver than I am a first-round receiver. So that's great news for both Collins and Dell, especially Nico Collins. And finally, a winner at the wide receiver position, we'll go with George Pickens, who is the unquestioned number 1 receiver now in Pittsburgh. They traded Deontay Johnson away, and Russell Wilson throws a pretty good deep ball, so there could be that connection there. However, he will have to deal with, Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator. And this is assuming that Russell Wilson, still has something left in the tank. But the opportunity is there, and that's why he is a winner coming out of free agency. He's not somebody that I particularly am willing to take a risk on, but you simply can't doubt that the opportunity for him to break out and be a really high level wide receiver is certainly there. But again, as we mentioned earlier on the show, I do expect Pittsburgh to add someone at the wide receiver position relatively early in the draft. So now we're going to go over to the losers, and there weren't too many losers either at wide receiver or tight end, who we'll talk about later, but I got 3 players here listed as losers at the wide receiver position, and number 1 might be a little bit surprising, but to me it's Keenan Allen, who goes from the Chargers to the Bears. He loses Justin Herbert, who is, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's going to be the number 2 receiver on his own offense now behind DJ Moore. He's going to be playing with a rookie quarterback. He's aging. He's coming off of injuries. I think this is somebody that you should be looking to trade away, because when he was healthy last year, he was awesome. When he was in a really good situation with a really good quarterback. But receivers do typically struggle with rookie quarterbacks, and even if the situation looks very strong for Caleb Williams, coming in, certainly Caleb Williams is a winner out of this free agency, but Keenan Allen somebody that probably is not going to make a huge fantasy impact for you this upcoming season. So he's somebody that I would be moving on from. Next up is Treylon Burks of the Tennessee Titans, who has fallen now to number 3 on the depth chart with the signing of Calvin Ridley. And this is probably his last, real chance to prove himself, as a startable wide receiver, both in fantasy and in real life, before he, gets that bust label coming out of the draft. So we'll see what they do with him. Again, Will Levis is in a position where he's going to have all the weapons to, show he can make it as an NFL quarterback. But I'm just not sure that Treylon Burks is going to be able to overcome the situation, overcome the injuries, and really, become a higher level fantasy wide receiver. And then last but not least is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. The Bills signed Curtis Samuel to a decent free agent contract, and it's unfortunate for Khalil Shakir because they kind of play the same role on an offense, so it does seem a little redundant. I'm not sure that this was the move I would have made if I were in charge of the Bills, but they needed some wide receiver help, so it's certainly not bad from a Josh Allen standpoint, but for Shakir, it does limit his breakout potential that I think a lot of people were excited about for this upcoming season, and they probably still will draft a wide receiver, whether it's first or second round. I'd be shocked if they don't add someone to that receiver room. So unfortunately, that makes Khalil Shakir a free agency loser. And moving on to the final position, tight end, where we didn't see a ton of action of, with fantasy relevance in the tampering period or after the league new year started. The two biggest moves we covered on last week's show happened. They were re-signings that happened before free agency. So again, I'm a big fan of Dalton Schultz going back to Houston, Hunter Henry returning to New England. But in terms of actual free agency moves, Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta really is a big move for Kyle Pitts, which makes Kyle Pitts a winner at the tight end position. I don't know that he will ever reach the ceiling that I think a lot of people envisioned for him coming out of college, but he still can be a very high-level tight end, a top 5 at the position, and I think this year is really the season where, if Kyle Pitts can stay healthy, he's got that pocket passer, that, upper echelon quarterback that can get him the ball. We've seen Kirk Cousins support multiple wide receivers and a tight end in Minnesota with, Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson. So I can certainly envision that same sort of situation for Kyle Pitts to, have a TJ Hawkinson-like season. Next up is Evan Engram, who becomes, with Ridley leaving, I think Engram is going to be the clear number 2 target in the offense. Trevor Lawrence is going to be facing a lot of pressure to bounce back. And Engram had a really good year last year. I believe he was finished as the number 2 tight end, depending on your format. And I'm not that worried about adding a rookie receiver to compete with Engram, whether it's Brian Thomas or somebody in the second round. Whatever the situation is, Engram to me is somebody that still has a solid window here over the next few seasons to provide some high-level fantasy play or fantasy value at the tight end position. So Evan Engram is a winner coming out of free agency because he no longer has to deal with Ridley, and I think Evan Ingram's a better pass catcher than Gabe Davis. Certainly more consistent. Next up, we have 2 kind of lower-level players, and we'll start with Colby Parkinson, who signed with the Rams. Primarily more of a blocking tight end, but he got a really solid contract, and he's somebody that, could see some pass catching work with Tyler Higbee being injured. So, this is not somebody that I would recommend that you go out and trade for or, anything like that. But if you have him on your team, maybe hold off from dropping him. See what you might get in the fall. And he's somebody that you should check your waivers for in Dynasty. He might be out there. I'll bet he is a free agent in a lot of leagues. So see if you can scoop him up, because he did get a nice financial commitment from the Rams. Always something to keep in mind on, or keep an eye on. And finally, we have Noah Fant, who I actually have as both a winner and a loser at the tight end position. But we'll start with the positive things for Noah Fant first. So number one is he got a 2-year contract worth $21 million. He's going to be the starting tight end. But he doesn't have to worry about Parkinson, who we just talked about, or Will Disley anymore, who went to the Chargers. So he doesn't have the competition, and that's really what makes Noah Fant a winner at the tight end position, because he's not going to be, out there for 40% of snaps while they cycle through blocking tight ends all the time. This is not the Pete Carroll offense anymore. New coaching staff with Mike McDonald. And Noah Fant was a first-round pick, high-level player. We saw some really late breakouts with guys like David Njoku, and Evan Engram had a career resurgence. So there's been a lot of talk about Noah Fant, potentially having some relevance in 2024 throughout the Dynasty space. He could have it. He got a nice contract. He's the clear number one at the position, so we'll see what happens there. I don't love the quarterback situation with Geno Smith and Sam Howell, but and might as well, we'll just jump right into the losers, because we'll start with Noah Fant, who, like I said, I kind of, half and half with him between winning and losing, because he's a loser because he's still stuck in Seattle. I think most people would have been more excited had he gotten the contract he did somewhere else to be the number one tight end, because by staying in Seattle, while he doesn't have to deal with Disley and Parkinson anymore, he still is stuck with, a trio of high-level pass catchers with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN. So, at best, he's probably, the fourth receiving option in what is maybe an average at best offense. So, not a great landing spot, but there are some positives for Noah Fant. So that's why it's my game. I can make up the rules. So I'm going to have him as a winner and a loser at the tight end position. And then we will go ahead and wrap up with the final loser at the tight end position, and that's Gerald Everett. He went from being a pretty solid late round fantasy option at the tight end position to basically worthless now that he's in Chicago, stuck behind Cole Kmet. Not only is he going to be a backup, but he's going to be playing with a rookie quarterback, which in most scenarios, even where the rookie quarterback ends up being a good player, the passing volume just usually isn't there to support multiple high-level fantasy assets. So, there's going to be questions about whether Cole Kmet will be as good as he was last year, let alone will there be any leftover work to make Gerald Everett more than, a potential handcuff should Kmet suffer an injury. So it's unfortunate for Gerald Everett, but, I think he would have been better off staying with the Chargers. But that's how things go in free agency in the NFL. So Gerald Everett, somebody that I'd be looking to trade away, or probably not somebody that's going to have any more relevance in Dynasty, at least over the next year. So that's it for today's episode. We touched on a lot of different players, winners and losers across the NFL. We didn't hit on every single move or free agent signing, but we touched on most of the ones that I think will have a lot of fantasy impact. So stay tuned. We're going to shift over the next few weeks into more rookie content as we start watching more film. We're going to go over in depth each position, really kind of break down how I see each rookie fitting, and some draft capital, and where you should be targeting rookies in your rookie drafts. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate you all for listening. This is the Dynasty War Room podcast, and thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you all next week.